All right, welcome to Child Chatter, the first episode here. We have Jacob Perry, our co-host, myself, another co-host, Aaron Marvel, and our first episode is with Jordan Karp, a teacher of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. We are grateful to have him. This show will consist largely of talking about emotional intelligence or any issues in psychology in order to address the whole child and so that they um, will get the best education possible, not just addressing the academics, but also the cognitive, the moral development, and things like that. And so we are happy to have Jordan. And first of all, Jordan, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name's Jordan. I am not exactly a native of Arkansas. I was born in Korea, but I've grown up here most of my life, specifically in Little Rock. I graduated from a private school called Lutheran High, and then I graduated with a bachelor's in studio art at the University of Central Arkansas in Conway. But I eventually worked my way, and I'm now about to finish up my master's degree in education for math.
Excellent. So I'd like to know, Jordan, what interests me about your development professionally and personally is how you ended up teaching and how you found this passion for teaching. So I'd like to hear what led you to where you are in that area.
Well, when I went to college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, like a lot of students. And like a lot of students, I wasn't really told that that was all right. As a student, when I was a kid, I was just interested in a lot of things. I liked learning voraciously. But when I got to college, I kind of realized that learning specifically in terms of academia wasn't what I enjoyed quite as much as trying to explain concepts to people. Nearing the end of my uh, undergrad, I had a really amazing experience working with the Upward Bound program, and I worked with first generation college students. And that's when everything kind of snapped into place, kind of in terms of the things I liked about learning when I was growing up and applying it. So I kind of made some decisions and started pursuing education after that.
Excellent. And so what took you towards math specifically?
That's a really good question, and I actually was. I remember when I declared it, I was hitting myself because like I hated math in high school. I didn't think I was very good at it. I did it for two reasons. One was the practical side of it. Since I was coming from an art education, like I was preparing to be a studio artist, the thought of job security was kind of weighing heavily on my mind. But the other really more important part was that I think there's a dearth of highly qualified math teachers because I've met so many people, and most of the people I talk to, you meet so many people that are just terrified of math. And I've actually heard that they've have a like psychologists diagnose people who have a fear of doing math. And as however bad my experience was with math in school, I never hated it in that way, and it kind of disturbed me that so many kids get shut out of an entire branch of learning because of some bad experiences when they were younger.
I've actually heard that exact same thing from other, surprisingly, math teachers that they grew up and they hated math, they didn't understand math, but then they grew up and learned to love it, and they want to share that same love with other students. How do you feel like that you've really built that love in your students, or maybe how do you address teaching math differently than maybe your teachers did?
That's a really good question. I think it has to. It kind of ties in with my personal philosophy towards teaching, and that is this is where I sound like a bad teacher. I don't know if I particularly have more of an affinity for math. I really did love most of my education. Like I just like concepts. It just disturbs me that so many people get shut out of math. For me, my approach when I'm teaching children is not to oversell it, not to say that this is just the greatest thing and you're just kind of silly for not seeing that, because that I've noticed that that kind of excludes a lot of people that don't like math in the first place. I try and let math sneak up on them. You try and make it understated so that they're kind of surprised themselves how into it they are. That's when you have them. At least from my limited experience, that's kind of the, uh, I guess, aim I've been steering towards in terms of my own teaching mechanics.
So when you say that the moment that they realize that they're actually into it, that's when you have them. It sounds like that's when you also have them in a situation that you seem to have fallen in love with, and that's learning the concepts, because they realize it's not about the math anymore. It's something more. There's some process within it. It's something that they're able to learn. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that extends beyond just the mathematical concepts, and why learning is so important, and how you then impart that on your students?
Yeah, it's been disturbing to realize kind of how compartmentalized ideas are to so many students. And this is to students and peers I've had growing up and people older than me. The thought of learning a lot of things, that's a very gargantuan task to most people because they think everything's separated from one another. Like if I learn math, there's no way I can dedicate any time to learning like physics or science or anything else. I can only be good at one thing. And I try and help my kids see that, if I learn math and I start seeing the underlying patterns, that's the same as when you start picking up team dynamics, playing a team sport like soccer or something. You love being in on that knowledge, and however different the actual discrete knowledge is, that empowered feeling of knowing how a system works, I think that's universal across any form of learning.
I love that you bring up that uh, you use that word love and learning in the same sentence. And I think that's really big when it comes to ensuring that kids are not just in school just because they're forced to, or they're not doing the work just out of compliance, but they're in school because they love it. And part of that is you mentioned they recognize that power of the knowledge that they have and the ability that they have to learn. And once those students feel like they have the efficacy, they have that self-efficacy, they say, yeah, I can do this, I can be successful. And I think there's some real power in that, especially when it's building that emotional fortitude, I guess, when it comes to approaching new and challenging tasks. Uh, I know you also have some thoughts as far as emotional intelligence and encouraging those positive feelings in students when it comes to learning. And how do you approach that in your own classroom?
To me, the emotional rapport with students precedes anything else. I don't make gains with their assessments by just trying to, if I rewrite a math equation differently and go through it differently. Every in that I've experienced has come from dedicating time informally, making those tiny inroads, because so many of the students I've come across, they're normal, healthy kids, but they seem very impoverished when it comes to encouragement or just motivation. And I realized I compared that to my upbringing, and I take it for granted, but I was constantly told I could do something, and that makes a world of difference for these students. And it's not just telling them that; it's getting them interested. You can't just sell them that, oh, you can do whatever you want. You just try and make whatever they're doing, whatever they're interested in, A, relevant, and B, not so different from what I'm trying to teach them in front of the classroom. If you can start making some connective tissue between things, then it's not so much hard work for them. It's something that they can invest naturally with.
And I think that hints at a bigger issue, Jordan, is that our school system and really the whole process of learning is about more than just the data, the information, the facts. Learning how to do math equations. If a student graduates and can do any math equation you present to him or her, is that a successful education? Is that something we want to marvel at? Is that something we're going to call a model for what we produce in our educational system? And I think what I hear from you is that there's got to be a lot more than that. Some folks don't have that supportive background, like you said, either from their parents, a family life, that instills confidence to be able to go beyond just a learning process. I'd like to hear some of the challenges you face specifically at Central High School where you are, and also how you've been able to deal with some of those challenges. Some maybe points in case there. Case in point. Said that backwards.
I've had very limited time at Central, but it's been outstanding. I think it's a fantastic school. A really interesting thing, kind of hitting on your point, is you asked if a student can just, if I can show them an equation, they can just do it. Is that a sign of them being good at math? And that's really, really important question, because no, it really isn't. I've done work in grad school kind of talking about what are the standards we've really set for high school students and how much does that translate into their performances in college. And even our A students, they struggle really badly, and it's with stuff they shouldn't be, because they're not really getting focused on the right things in high school. And I don't know if that's a problem with assessments. We're training people to compute rather than think, and that's a really big difference that I don't think enough teachers underscore for their students. Like you could probably go into any high school, and I did this while at Central. At any time, if some kid's trying to do a slightly larger multiplication and you do it kind of quickly in your head, to them that's like the most telling sign that you're good at math. And it disturbs me greatly, because that's a giant misconception. That isn't math whatsoever. That's computation. It has nothing to do with skills that I think mathematicians want students to be learning in high school. And I think that's kind of what Common Core has been trying to promote, is kind of a deeper understanding. I don't care if you can put a round peg into a round hole. That doesn't matter to me, as long as you understand what's actually going on. But in terms of Central, yeah, I've worked with pre-AP students and remedial students, and I have found it more difficult to work with pre-AP students than remedial students, personally.
Why is that?
There's a very different attitude that you kind of come across. Remedial students, there's very overt issues, but just because they're overt issues like behavioral stuff, that's not really that big of a deal if you keep working on it. Sometimes it can be, but that's not really telling of their attitude or how they're going to take or how they're going to receive any of the efforts you're putting out. But pre-AP students, they worry me a lot. They don't really seem engaged. They don't really seem invested. They seem slightly arrogant with what they think they know, and it's not much. They are very they just want the bottom line. They don't really care. A lot of them I don't see really enjoying it. They just are good at doing it. So I found it very strange, and it surprised me that the remedial students have been more receptive if you can maneuver it in the right way. But I've had to try and be a little bit more creative to get the pre-AP students who have no problems to kind of dig deeper.
Actually, go ahead,
ahead.
Well, he mentioned a point about the pre-AP students that really caught my eye, and I think a lot of times our most successful students, when it comes to they look successful on paper, is because they have learned to play the game. Especially, Jordan, you've spoken much about assessments. Assessments is part of that game that our students learn how to play. Success is measured by passing or not passing a state standardized test. And so that kind of begs the question, is that really success? And if so, does success lie, if not, if the success is something other than passing a test, does it lie beyond just the curriculum, which I think you've touched on as well? You asked the question, is it really the most important question to ask, do you understand the math? And I think you're right. The answer is no. The most important thing is beyond the math. Obviously, the math is important, but I think we're entering into a society that requires more than just math and science and English. And I think it goes into what some people call soft skills, the creativity, understanding how to communicate, how to collaborate with one another. Are these some of the skills that you might address in your classroom as well?
It's hard to. It depends on what you mean by address. I don't haven't explicitly because I guess I don't have the time with the curriculum to spend a day. I wish I could. I wish I could spend a day talking to students about different strengths because I think you're absolutely right. There's a big disconnect between whether what we think we're trying to get students to be good at in math, which is problem solving, is accurately reflected with standardized assessments. Problem solving. Problem is when you think about what a problem is, it needs to be a novel thing. It's not some very cookie cutter set way I've seen it 1,000 times, and that seems to be all most standard assessments are. So that's where you get the connective tissue between just math. Can I throw something at you and can you solve it? Maybe you need math to solve it. Maybe math would aid you in solving it, but it's not strictly a math problem. And that's those are the type of the different skills you're talking about. Problems in the real world don't come with a little pretty ribbon that say this is a math problem or this is a literature problem. If successful people pull in skills that they learned learning about these different things, but the problem itself isn't, a nicely contained, categorized thing. So I try and get my students at school, I try and get them to take whatever they think they're good at and try and see that I tell them, oh, you like basketball, Jeremiah, you really love it, but you don't like this as much because it's harder and you struggle with it more. Well, then I try and tell him, was he always good at basketball? Like, how long did it take you? And I get him to think about it, and he talks about how much he practiced day in and day out after and before school. And I just said, well, you put in your hours then. It's zero difference between that and learning any other skill. So.
Yeah, Jordan, I think you pointed out something that's really important about the collaborative aspect of this. That in real life, and in what I'm getting at is in real life, you mentioned how problems are going to be novel. They're going to arise in a way that you haven't seen before, and you have to work at it in a new way. It's not some rote memorization of a process like sometimes standardized assessments tend to be. And bringing it back to what Aaron had talked about with collaboration and some of the softer skills, which you could maybe call some social skills as well. We also know in life, and especially in professional environments in the real world, you have to deal with things more collaboratively. When you're on a team, then you have a new problem, whether you're an engineer or a teacher for that matter, or a principal, you have issues that you have to deal with as a team. You're not going to have all the skills, but collectively you can use your competencies to address a problem creatively as part of a team. And so I'm wondering, are those things that you're able to teach in your classroom? I know there are standards and regulations and time restrictions, etc., but I'd like to hear how you've been able to address some of those things in your classroom.
Oh, I feel like I'm going to get reprimanded. I read a great piece, and it was talking about the main gist of the piece was that curriculum needs to change based on the skills students need, because times change, and what it means to be a responsible, productive adult in this society is different than what it was 20 or 30 years ago. I don't think, because education is this massive thing and we're a massive country, I don't really think it would even be possible, really, for the infrastructure of public education to move that quickly. I don't think what we have now is perfect, but I don't think anyone would try and contest that. I think Common Core is a really beautiful attempt at trying to change the discussion about curriculum, but it's still not there, and there is a lot of work, because I do think we live in a post-Moneyball world, and I don't think people are looking enough at qualitative results. Everything's about being quantitative. So most of the I think the heavy work I do in a classroom isn't stuff I write down. It's not stuff that has a number to it. And the simple fact that people think that that's not good enough, to me, is an indication that we're too far invested in purely quantitative results. I don't think we can just throw numbers at problems. Like, you have to have a discerning eye alongside numbers to really bring about results. So I think a lot of really good mishmashing of science with thinking is what it's going to take to bring about a lot of change, both societally and specifically with education. And I think that's talking about what you're talking about with softer skills. I don't think there's enough emotional intelligence in academia and policy making right now, as it
So
is.
you think that might be what could bring about the change is at a policy level, start implementing new requirements, or at least relax some of the requirements right now that tend towards more quantitative rather than qualitative?
Oh man, yeah. Now we're theory crafting about how to save the public school system. Um, I am by no means an expert. Just my personal take as a young teacher. I don't think more requirements. I just feel like it does feel like a tightening of what teachers can do, and I feel like more requirements of things for the teachers can do is only removing them from being actively engaged in the classroom. Now, I'm not saying that no assessments are good and no that we can get away with no paperwork. I'm not saying that, but it's just like most things in life. I think there needs to be a better balance of both freedom we're allotting teachers and things they need to uh, report back on. Um, I I really think what needs to be done is much more extensive and better training and more care just for educating teachers.
Actually, I love that you use the word balance. I think you're exactly correct. We can't do away with quantitative data. I think it's very important. But however, I believe that government and large organizations, they they're a little more removed than the teacher, and so in their mind, they feel it's necessary to see those numbers. I think there may even be a fear there that if those numbers weren't there, the accountability system would crumble, and hence the educational system wouldn't
Totally
be
agree.
as much as high as quality. Um, but however, I think the title, No Child Left Behind, has actually created more children being left behind, because like you said,
Absolutely.
it's put teachers within a box and within a
Yes.
curriculum that they must follow, and we've gotten away from some of the relationship building, the building up students and their emotional intelligence, like you mentioned, just teaching students how to be successful in life and not just in the curriculum. And so I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, because I think you're right, and it requires some qualitative as well assessments. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know if any of us had the answer right now, but I think it's a good discussion to have.
If I was to mention one more thought I had on the subject, it would be it makes sense based on how the system works that you would want quantitative data. But the problem is that sometimes people describe our society as a machine, and a really good friend of mine has described that that's not a very healthy way to look at systems of people, because, like you said, there are a small group of people having to make decisions for everyone, and because of that, I think that they can't do anything but rely on numbers. And like you said, they don't want to look like they're making these decisions randomly. My friend said that a much better metaphor would be that we need to be more of an organism. Like, if you think about how organs work in a body, they're much more codependent in that they have some level of autonomy for themselves, but they can all work independently, and the health of one promotes the health of the other ones. So sometimes I think in education, I don't know if it's as simple as saying big government versus little government. I just think there needs to be a better system of empowering people at local stages, and that's kind of like what this is. That has been the one, I think, uh, one thing that's kind of leveled the playing field is kind of how much I think teachers are getting to collaborate now with stuff like this, and just the availability of resources between teachers over the internet.
It's funny that you mentioned collaborating over the internet. I think that's huge, and I think the answers that we don't have that we've touched on. I think that collaboration, especially through social media, Twitter, Facebook, Google Hangouts, like we're using right now, these are perfect mediums to begin these conversations that are required. Because I think to come to the answer, it's going to take a collective genius. Um, which I think we're approaching, and I think that we're molding it as we go. So
Yeah, I'd agree.
Well, here we are, the three of us in our collective genius, and I'm really glad that we've had Jordan on here today, because really this is an opportunity for Aaron and I to become more genius, individually genius. But I would like to bring this back to a specific, more specific topic. Jordan, in your experience at Central High, so that's a high school that obviously has some very unique history to it, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how things are there currently, but it has a lot of national reputation, and I know in Arkansas it's a very reputable school, and you have a unique environment there you're teaching in,
Mm-hmm.
with unique challenges, unique advantages, etc. I'd like to hear about some of your experiences there with specific students dealing with some of the issues we've talked about, students that may come from backgrounds that are more challenging, and yet you were able to teach outside of what you're tasked with teaching by the state, develop more life skills, and see some successes as students go along this ride of learning.
I I notice with a lot of my students, it's a very diverse school, and I think uh, it has a good level of diversity. I don't think there's too much of one demographic, and I think having that diverse of a classroom, just every creed and color, and it's different ethnicities, different socioeconomic backgrounds. You know, it is strange, and I keep going back to that, but I would just listen to them interacting before and after classes, and it would kind of load ammunition for me in terms of what I can use to get through to them. I realized that every single student that said they didn't get it at any time, if you could tweak it, if you could change the language you're using around something that you heard them talking about before, just that, a lot of times I realize they don't have a point of reference. So I was listening to one of my students talk, and I guess Jeremiah was one of my favorite students, and his point of reference was basketball, and he just could not understand what was it? He couldn't understand how a parabola would work in real life. That was his big thing. He was really upset about. He didn't understand how this could ever model something in real life. And I could just talked about, when he was shooting a basketball, type the arc of that, and how it would rise and fall, and why was it falling, and just the behavior of that. And it's amazing. As soon as you say the right thing, everything clicks into place. He says, "Oh, this is super easy now," and then he would go on to ace the rest of his homework. Um, the real struggle with Central is, I feel like I could do really well in a particular session. The real struggle was dealing with a block schedule with these students, because I remember being a little flabbergasted, probably a month or two in, because I felt like I would do so well in class. I feel like I'd have the students in a good place. They were helping each other answer their own questions, and it just felt like we were being productive. And then we have a quiz, and they would just tank it. So I would listen to them before and after class, and I would just realize that a lot of them are just struggling to keep in their brains something that they've had a complete day in between of learning. So they learn something on Monday, they go Tuesday, they learn completely different separate classes, and then they come back Wednesday and have to not only remember what they learned Monday, but learn something new that's building off of it. And strangely, that was the number one obstacle for me at Central. Um, and I hate to throw it at scheduling, but I don't think block schedule is perfect for all subjects.
Well, we're coming close to the end of our time, but I have one more question for you, Jordan. You mentioned the student who just bombs a test, and I know the effects of that, especially when a student, that's all they've experienced throughout their school career. Put yourself back in the classroom as a teacher, and you have that student who's had that history, that just struggled with the test. Based on much of the discussion that we've had today, and in your experience, what do you say to that student to help them to build that emotional intelligence, to build that self-efficacy, to help them continue on a new path?
That's tough. It depends on a few things. I'll share a failure I had, which is always good. Failures are better than successes a lot. I had that student, and she failed quite badly, and she just kind of nonchalantly said, "Oh, I'm stupid," and just kind of threw the quiz away in class. And I'll tell you, the mistake I first did was just trying to comfort her and be contradictory, just be like, "No, you're not. Like, you're really smart," and stuff like this. And I would try and just build her up, but I realized I was just building her up with air. I wasn't being constructive with how I was complimenting her, and she hadn't earned it. And I realized very quickly how not only useless that is, but actually counterproductive. I had such a great mentor teacher, Mr. Stavey. He's a soccer and football coach. I now have a coach mentality towards when I'm dealing with my students. If you're good enough friends with them, if you have a good enough rapport, they don't want to let you down, and that's really hard to get to. But how do I motivate students who fail is you just tell them that you can do better than that, and offer them as many chances as they can to try and redeem themselves, and try and look at these
Right.
not as separate episodes, but this isn't over. You haven't lost for the year. You still have a lot of more little battles that you have ahead of you, and you have me as a resource, but I'm expecting much better of you for the next one, and I know you can do that. Um, I wish there was a magic bullet for it being easier than that, but it is this weird teetering thing of how much it depends on the rapport you built up with that student.
Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned that failure can be good, and it's even better than success sometimes. I heard recently something I really liked. It was that I'm failing on my way to success, and I think that is an
Absolutely.
important way to look at failure. It's a result.
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
not necessarily the end. It's something that you learn from. So,
Yeah.
indeed.
Well, thank you, Jordan. I think you're wise beyond your chronological years as well as your years of experience as a teacher.
No
Um,
problem. It
you
was
you've really
fun.
shared some wise things, and I could continue talking about this. You just on the last comment, I had a lot more thoughts, but
Oh
unfortunately, we're
no.
going to have to end this. And hey, you never know. One of these days, we'll have you back on the show. Um,
I'd love to.
but thank you for our listeners and our watchers listening to our first episode of Child Chatter, and hope to see you next time.